Lecture 1, The Garden, the Matrix, the Serpent, and a New and Modest Proposal. I begin this lecture series by thanking you for listening. By the title and timing, you may have any number of concerns, questions, issues, and curiosities. The observant will note that these lectures are timed to coincide with a separate but similar series of lectures on a similar topic, but likely with a different spin on it. I will be leaning on my Catholic upbringing and experience in the domain of science and technology in this 4-part lecture series that is truly an examining of consciousness, of Christ consciousness and the Anti-Christ consciousness, not of man, of good and evil principles, but of consciousness, the way through which we view the world and that which determines our actions, thoughts, and words. Let's start at the beginning. There are 2 creation myths that I will compare to launch us into the series. The first is the one in the Holy Bible, and the second is the one in the Matrix. In the Genesis myth, the Garden of Eden is a harmonious biosphere, a world made not for the domination by mankind, but for its stewardship by mankind. It is not a sandbox to exploit, but a song to learn. In Eden, God breathes life into man. In the Matrix, man breathes code into machine. One is organic unity, the other is simulated. In the Genesis story, man awakens into a world not of his making, but one made for him. A garden, complete and alive. He is given breath, then purpose, not to rule by force, but to name. The animals are brought to him not as tools, not as threats, but as companions in divine trust. The world is unfinished, not because it's broken, but because it's waiting for a steward. His task is to cultivate, to tend, to walk with the Creator in the cool of the day. The danger is not in the work, but in disobedience, not from wires or guns, but from the seduction of knowing more than we're ready for. Even still, the choice is real. He can eat. No hand restrains him. No firewall blocks the fruit. He is warned, but not imprisoned. Now, fast forward, or rewind, depending on your cosmology, to the Matrix. A future creation myth where man is no longer the gardener but the crop. The earth is scorched, the sky is blackened by man himself, and the machines, born of human ingenuity, keep the species alive only to harvest its bioelectric energy. Humans live not in nature, but in nutrient pods stacked like data servers, cooled and pumped like livestock. To keep the mind occupied, while the body is harvested, a simulation is broadcast, a digital illusion of late 20th century civilization, complete with jobs, apartments, subway, trains, and sushi. The world outside is ash and thunder, but inside, it's 1999 forever. In Genesis, man walks among the animals and gives them names. In the Matrix, man is farmed by the machines he once named. In Genesis, free will is unfiltered. A command is given, yes, but it is not enforced. In the Matrix, free will is an elaborate fiction, pre-written and sandboxed. Neo is allowed to rebel, only within the terms of the simulation. Even the prophecy of his coming is machine-generated, an antivirus program masquerading as Messiah. The God of Genesis allows man to fall, and in doing so allows him to grow. The architect of the Matrix resets the system when too many anomalies occur. There is no grace, only version control. The first myth entrusts the human soul with choice. The second manipulates it with code. One God steps back so man may choose. The other steps in precisely to prevent that. Both stories begin with creation, but only one begins with trust. God saw that it was good. That is the crux. That single line from Genesis is a metaphysical anchor, not just a statement of aesthetic approval, but a declaration of ontological truth. Creation itself is good, not neutral, not a placeholder, not an illusion to be endured. Good. Before humans name the animals, before Eve breathes, before Adam disobeys, it is good. That's the original premise, the base code of the cosmos: light, sky, sea, land, stars, creatures. Good. Not because man perceives it that way, but because the Creator sees it that way. This is not utilitarian goodness, not conditional or extractive. It is not good because it serves us. It is good in its own right. And that's precisely what is missing in the Matrix world. In the Matrix simulation, nothing is good unless it can be monetized, controlled, consumed, or manipulated. The simulation exists not because it reflects reality, but because it pacifies consciousness. It's a loop to keep the machine running. In this world, meaning is artificial. Beauty is a distraction. Truth is just a program. Free will is a sandbox function. Goodness is irrelevant. Whereas in Genesis, the garden is not a simulation. It's a real place, untamed, raw, alive. The serpent is not an algorithm. The risk of disobedience is not patched by the next update. It's real. But so is the potential for redemption. In Genesis, you are given everything: life, love, labor, limitation, and freedom. Not to be useful, but because you're loved. That's the difference. One world says it is good, even knowing what comes next. The other says it is necessary, even while harvesting your body for energy. One trusts, the other surveils. One grants you a name, the other assigns you a numerical user ID. One creates you for stewardship. The other simulates you for compliance. Only one sees you and still says, "This is good." In the Genesis narrative, good is not a derivative of violence, entropy, or competition. It is not a byproduct of necessity or survival. It is ontological, inherent in the structure of existence, before the knowledge of good and evil enters human awareness, before human beings even enter the universe or the story. When God creates light, sky, land, sea, stars, plants, and living creatures, he declares each of them good, not with moral relativism, not with a utilitarian caveat, not as a compromise between destruction and order, but as a complete and independent recognition of their harmony, balance, and form. Even death, which is not yet introduced in the garden, is not evil. Decomposition is part of natural order. Microbes consume the dead so that they may live. The soil is renewed and life continues. There is a cohesive regenerative cycle in the world God makes. That is not evil. That is the design. That is stewardship. That is good. Evil, then, is not defined in Genesis as pain, hunger, violence, or death. It is introduced in the concept of deception, a warping of the will through manipulation. You will not surely die, the serpent says, for God knows when you eat of it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God. See, it is not murder that begins the story of evil. It is ambition divorced from humility. It is the allure of being like God, not through union, reverence, or understanding, but through a shortcut, a cheat code, a bypass of the natural order. This is the serpent's ethos, not to elevate Adam and Eve, but to remove them from their correct and proper relationship with the world. He does not offer the knowledge as a teacher, he offers it as a temptation. It is not revelation, it is a distortion. It is not for empowerment, but for estrangement. Now, if you look to the Matrix, you'll see the same structure. A technological serpent coiling around the tree of life, inverted. In the simulation, the machines harvest humanity's bioelectric energy while feeding them a virtual dream of the world as it once was. A facsimile of Eden, sterilized, stylized, scripted. In this world, free will is simulated, not honored. You may choose what shirt to wear, but not whether to leave the cage. Choice itself is curated, monitored, manipulated through control of perception, access, and consequence. And when a real choice is made, when Neo rejects the Matrix false logic, the entire system treats him as an anomaly to be erased. This is the ethos of the machine: control, disguise, harvest, punish. It is the serpent at scale. In contrast, Genesis offers no such retaliation. God allows Adam and Eve to choose. He warns, but he does not restrain. When they disobey, he does not delete them. He clothes them, walks with them, gives them children, and lets them become real agents in the unfolding of history. Even in exile, free will is what persists. Even after the fall, man is not a battery. He is not relegated to being a battery. He is a co-creator, a gardener, a prophet, a poet, and ultimately, in the Christian tradition, a redeemed being through Christ. So, the question is not whether suffering exists, if it's good or evil. It is what intention sits behind an action. In Genesis, suffering emerges through the misuse of freedom, but the redemption is possible. In the Matrix, suffering is the operating system itself, with no redemption, escape, or surrender. Meanwhile, the mind is placated with the illusion of choice. See, there's a difference between the illusion of choice and actual free will. That is the nature of evil laid out in Scripture. Not simply bad things happening, but the intellectual inversion of good for gain. The serpent's pitch is always the same: trust me, I'll make you more powerful. And the result is always exile, bondage, and alienation. But the Creator's whisper remains: it is good. And that's the difference between a world created in love and one simulated in its absence. Fallen man, in the biblical narrative, is not merely a criminal or a mistake. He is a wounded consciousness. He is the being who has chosen autonomy over unity, deception over trust, power over communion. In Adam's choice, humanity is severed from Eden, not just physically, but metaphysically. The fall is a fall of perspective. From then on, man becomes aware of his nakedness, aware of death, of shame, of the otherness of the world. He hides, he blames, he toils. His consciousness bends toward fear and domination. Cain kills Abel. Lamech brags of murder. Babel is built. The story cascades. But even in exile, the seed of redemption is preserved. Consciousness is not fully destroyed, only darkened, fallen. What remains is the aching memory of the garden, the longing for communion, the search for meaning. The serpent's promise was half true. You will be like God, knowing good and evil. But it was not the likeness of God through love and communion that was offered. It was the usurpation of God through self-will and disobedience. It is a vision of divinity twisted into pride, not into humility. And that's the brilliance, the paradoxical correction offered in the New Testament. God becomes man, not to dominate or to punish, but to suffer, to show what divinity actually looks like, not in a utopian garden, but on the hill of crucifixion. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That is Christ consciousness. That is consciousness awakened not through pleasure or might, but through willing surrender to the will of the Father, even under conditions of violence and death. Christ consciousness is not a rejection of a fall, but a response to it. It is not a divine override. It is the invitation to become again what we were meant to be. Not puppets, not animals, not simulations, but sons and daughters who can continually choose the path of love over coercion and of truth over deceit. Where the serpent tricks us into reaching for Godhood through pride, Christ invites us into godliness through humility. Where the matrix simulates choice within constraints, Christ embodies choice even when it leads to death. This is the ultimate proof that consciousness, true consciousness, cannot be manufactured or harvested. It must be lived. And yes, this is what the serpent cannot replicate: an example. Evil does not create examples. It creates idols, archetypes of domination, templates of manipulation. This is what your life should be like. The Christ life is not a code or a schema. It is not a marketing funnel or a neural network. It is a mystery that reveals itself only through love and sacrifice. It is not taught, it is shown. It is not extracted, it is offered. And that ultimately is what makes the incarnation not a reset, but a revelation, a way through. The tree of life, once barred by a flaming sword, now blooms in the shape of a cross. And instead of a snake coiled around it, a suffering God nailed to it. And that is the example that evil cannot give, because evil cannot love. Because love is not useful. It is good. And God saw that it was so. The neatness of that bow tie is not lost upon incorporation of the New Testament with the Old. It is the true promise of the serpent made manifest by the life and death of Jesus Christ. But instead of being a lie to bring mankind down to the level of the snake crawling on its belly, it is a living example that shows all of humanity how to live through God's love, through wrongful torture, imprisonment, and capital punishment in a literal way. That this is what God wants because it is good. The serpent's half-truth comes from the fact that Adam and Eve were already created in the likeness of God. They were already like God to begin with. And the knowledge of evil in the story comes at the moment of realizing their exile is a bitter punishment for the lack of trusting in God. So the knowledge of evil is knowing you bit the apple and now you have to pay the consequences. And also knowing that God wanted you to just be happy, and so he already gave you the wisdom to not do the things that would separate you from him. So, to say the least, to fuck around and find out via free will is the only truth the serpent was offering. It is this type of manipulation that first characterizes evil as opposed to good in the Bible. It is not suffering, violence, or anything other than ill will and deception to bring others down that is evil intrinsically. Evil in Satanism is often pitched as some sort of self-help information, as if being equipped with selfishness and deceptive tactics are in your best interest. I put it more simply, seek to prepare to help other people and you will help yourself. Much of the satanic literature, from the Satanic Bible to watered-down Reddit tier power manifestos, frames evil not as cruelty but as cleverness. It pitches deception, manipulation, and unbridled selfishness as secret tools for getting ahead in a world of fools. Be your own God. Do what thou wilt. Everyone else is just a weak and a sheep. But this is sleight of hand, because what it actually teaches is not power, but it's fear management. It tells wounded, insecure people that if they cloak themselves in selfishness and hide behind sharp words, they will never be heard again. It's not transformation, it's armor, and it's pretty brittle. By contrast, Christ's message is painfully simple. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Greater love hath no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. These aren't just poetic ideas, they're spiritual axioms. They are instructions for living in tune with the divine architecture of reality. They don't require mass media campaigns, cycles, influencers, that kind of thing. They don't make you a doormat. But because when followed, they generate power that multiplies, the kind that builds civilization, heals trauma, raises children, inspires courage, fuels sacrifice, protects the weak, and redeems the lost. If satanic philosophy is a dead tree with black leaves of cleverness, Christ consciousness is the living vine, one that connects you to everyone and everything. The former isolates, the latter integrates you with everyone on the planet Earth. In the end, satanic texts must be verbose. They need the smoke and mirrors. The entire strength lies in the illusion of revelation. But the truth, real truth, is real clean. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. That's why a single sentence from Christ cuts deeper than entire tomes of certain esoteric rationalizations. Because it is spoken from the source, it doesn't need to justify itself. It is, and it is good. So yes, say it again, the golden rule of Christ consciousness renders all satanic literature overstated and way too wordy, because once you've felt real light, you don't need instructions on how to manipulate the shadows. Now I'm going to pull up some quotes from the guys Peter Thiel's lecture says it will include. So I will answer to them as well, not just Jesus. First, from Rene Girard. Man is the creature who does not know what to desire, and he turns to others in order to make up his mind. We desire what others desire because we imitate their desires. He's speaking for himself, I think, but applying it to people. I would say this is circular in a certain way. Man desires social acceptance, if this is the case. A baby, as all men start out as, do not know what t-shirt is fashionable in his or her area. Yes, this is true. But there is a root, and that root is the need for connection, which is underscored by our capacity to love. The next quote from him that ChatGPT pulled up for me. It says, we can put good between quotation marks here because everything is founded on evil violence. But it makes it less bad if you know that murder is forbidden from now on. Very edgy. This one is fundamentally false, as we have seen that it is not violence itself that is even intrinsically evil. As stated in the Bible's first story, it's actually deception and manipulation. But quotes like this, to justify it, I mean, hey, they might be what's evil. This is the fundamental principle. Not the violence of, say, predator and prey in the animal kingdom as it is presented in Genesis. So the premise here is wholly incorrect. The sarcastic overtone also would assume that murder being forbidden is not something that would be a consensus vote for most communities. So, to bring in a Kubrick reference, for example, Full Metal Jacket, right? Was Private Pyle in a world of shit? Yes, he was. Was he going to Vietnam and learning to be a killer in the United States Marine Corps? Yes. Was it a great outcome for him to kill his drill instructor? No, not really. Nuance like this is often too easily glossed over in these kind of manipulative quotes. So we'll go on to the next guy. This next guy is Carl Schmitt, who said, to be sure, Protestant theology presents a different, supposedly unpolitical doctrine, conceiving of God as the holy other. Just as in political liberalism, the state and politics are conceived as the holy other. Holy not being H-O-L-Y, but W-H-O-L-L-Y. We have come to recognize that the political is the total, and as a result, we know that any decision about whether something is unpolitical is always a political decision, irrespective of who decides and what reasons are advanced. Now, this quote is interesting in that it touches on something that seems to be going on in the modern era that actually kind of runs counter to it. And that's, I think we're seeing a lot of things being over-politicized, right? He's saying that saying what is politics and what isn't politics in and of itself is politics, and I understand that. But I think we've seen this a lot recently as more and more things have become overly politicized and polarized. I think we're making things political in the modern era as a tactic. And it's becoming more and more of a way of censoring, impeding, and snuffing out dialogue through the establishment of media machine-driven talking points. And nowadays, certain groups have relied on this tactic so much. You see headlines and they seem like they're parodies. They seem ridiculous and over the top. This is a tactic that is intrinsically manipulative. I would suggest that it's due in part to the linguistics misnomer of the word politics and political. More often than not, major issues increasingly fail to even become quote-unquote political when they ought to be, and more ridiculous topics are argued endlessly along psychological divides rather than in good faith. Politics ought to mean anything that's being argued or debated about that's going to be passed or is it being attempted to be passed into legislature, into law, into the codified laws that govern the country. But this is the real political machinations in the modern era that systems like Palantir and its use will use as their data engines for decision making. this over-politicization. It is important that we consider anything related to the lawmaking policies political, and that its very title or categorization as political, when we talk about topics, it's important that we don't get discouraged, or we don't encourage one another to shy away from open, engaging discussions. This is what I believe will be the evolution that will solve the problem that Carl Schmitt was talking about here. Next up, we have John Henry Newman, who says, there's two quotes here, "If we insist upon being as sure as is conceivable in every step of our course, we must be content to creep along the ground and can never soar." You can see why Peter Thiel might use that quote to justify his creeping surveillance equipment and companies. We'll hold off on that for the next quote. "The instrument of theology is reasoning, of worship, our emotional nature, of rule, command, and coercion. Further, as man is, reasoning tends to rationalism, devotion to superstition and enthusiasm, and power to ambition and tyranny." Now, these Newman quotes tend in the serpentine direction, don't they? There's always a tendency to overgeneralize in these types of quotes. Could we not also say that instead of theology, the instrument of philosophy is reasoning? Instead of worship, couldn't we say the instrument of art is our emotional nature? The instrument of rule is responsibility. Reasoning tends to rationalism, but it also tends to mystery and the unknown and curiosity. Devotion tends to hospitality. And power, in the right hands, tends toward selflessness. I think it really all depends on the person. I don't like any quote that tries to encapsulate all of the tendencies of man into this myopic lens, when I just gave counterexamples thinking about it for a relatively short amount of time. All of these figures, René Girard, Carl Schmitt, John Henry Newman, offer intellectual architecture that can be brilliant, flawed, or both. Their words are repurposed like bricks in the cathedral of modern technocratic modernism, now repainted by Peter Thiel as a stained glass windows for an anti-Christic sermon. And while we should give their thoughts the seriousness due, we must also ask, to what end? Because the circularity of Girard's mimetic desire, the rhetorical flattening of violence as foundational, the instrumental cynicism of Schmitt's total politic, and the serpentine generalizations in Newman's psychology of theology, these becomes less and less like lanterns to guide and more like mirrors in a labyrinth of them. And in that labyrinth, we arrive on the closing proposal for this first lecture. Now, one more person in Peter Thiel's lecture is Francis Bacon, and he once said, "Laws and institutions must go hand in hand with the progress of the human mind." Can we really say that Peter Thiel's Palantir and the laws supporting it go hand in hand with the progress of the human mind? If not, perhaps Peter ought not use Francis Bacon in his lecture series. Instead, I see more of a Jonathan Swift-based proposal based on Peter Thiel's life works on the horizon. And wow, would you look at that, here it is. Without further ado, I present a logical plan for the elimination of chaos, free will, and other inefficiencies by the United Consortium of Stability Technologies, the UCST. Trademark that right now. It is a melancholy object to those who walk the streets of our major cities or travel between zones of fluctuating sovereignty to witness the clusters of untagged individuals, some wandering without direction, some embedded with legacy beliefs, others even making autonomous decisions without algorithmic consultation. These are liabilities, not citizens. Friction, not throughput. The solution is not punishment. No, for that would be crude, but optimization. We propose a modest, elegant restructuring of society through public-private harmonization conducted by the wise stewards of Palantir for divine seeing, Anduril for righteous swordplay, BlackRock for sacred housing, Blackstone for noble transportation, and UCST, which shall oversee the implementation of the algorithm of beneficence. All humans will be offered a basic score called the Civic Alignment Index, or the CAI, tied to real-time data flows, speech, shopping patterns, hydration, retinal frequency, nutrient alignment, heart rate, shopping data, credit cards. This index shall determine eligibility for housing that is leased via BlackRock, access to movement corridors, licensed via Blackstone, reproductive scheduling, assisted via CRISPR optimization, inclusion in the upcoming West Bank real estate lottery, an opportunity for high-scoring Westerners to claim moral ownership of reclaimed lands near historic cultural zones. Note, children of low-scoring families may still serve as currency via integration into humanitarian imaging campaigns designed to secure funding for ongoing peace enforcement. Each fiscal quarter, a citizen from the legacy tier, formerly known as middle class, shall be selected via public lottery for data realignment. Like Shirley Jackson once envisioned, the winner shall voluntarily donate their biometric, psychometric, and neural digital twin to fuel the machine learning systems that guide our civilization. This is no death, but transcendence. A digitized sainthood, if you will. In return, their descendants, if any are permitted, will receive carbon offsets, limited movement permits, and renewable access to entertainment clusters in augmented reality-themed zones. We have heard objections from the class of sentimentalists, those who claim there is something sacred in the flesh, but what is the flesh without signal? Indeed, as the children of Gaza became pixel symbols and indicators in geopolitical portfolios, we learned a valuable truth. This is from a UCST internal strategy memo. What bleeds, feeds. So we here will let no child go unharvested, not for food, of course, but for narrative, telemetry, predictive fear modeling, and just-in-time empathy campaigns, that's trademark, and political blackmail campaigns that will not be allowed to be investigated fully. We assure you this is not dangerous. If it were dangerous, the system would say so. If it were evil, it would call itself evil, obviously, but it does not. It speaks in smooth notifications, efficient onboarding flows, excellent UI, and smart dashboards. So do not fear. Do not look behind the mirror. Do not listen to your intuition. It has been deprecated. Trust instead in the world we build, the world of modest proposals.